All right, in this video we are going to be taking a look at converting a image into an embroidery file. So let's go ahead and import the artwork that was given to us. So this image was posted to our Facebook group. It's called Learning Inkscape and InkStitch. And we posted asking for people to post a logo that they're looking to convert into embroidery. And then we would potentially do some videos on how to go about converting those logos. So this was one that was posted recently, and this particular individual says that the finished embroidery size should fit a left chest logo, so basically a 4-inch logo. So first things first, let's go ahead and resize our graphic here to make it fit a 4-inch hoop. So usually I do 3.8 is usually what I do. Okay. Now we don't have to do this, but this is one little nice little trick right off the top of the bat. If we select our image here and then hit Shift and Control and R, boom, you see our image or our document is the same size of the current selection now. So that's kind of fun. Just a quick little shortcut there. And so what we have here is we have this white square that represents the size of our hoop. So if we know we keep our embroidery inside this white square, it'll fit our 4x4 hoop. Okay. So what we have here obviously is we imported an image, a JPEG image. And so we have two choices when we're dealing with images. We can try and convert the image into a vector graphic, or we can just recreate the entire image here in Inkscape. Now, I don't want to recreate the entire image in Inkscape, certainly if I don't have to. So I'm going to try and convert this using Trace Bitmap first. So we'll come up here and we're going to choose Trace Bitmap. Now by default, these are the settings that were last used when we went into Trace Bitmap. And you can see here we're in brightness and cutoff, and we have this little slider called threshold, which works pretty good, especially for black and white images. So Inkscape in general does a really good job of converting things into vector artwork, but especially black and white. So we'll go ahead and just choose apply here, come back over to our layers and objects panel, and you can see now we have this path and we have this image. I'm going to turn off the visibility of my image. I don't want to look at that right now. I want to look at just the path that was created. And when we zoom in here, you could see how beautiful and crisp our lettering is. If you look at the little guy here, yeah, his head's a little bit tiny, not perfectly circular, but pretty good overall. You can see this all is pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with that. So that did a pretty good job tracing. Now, if I go over to outline mode, or sometimes I'll call it wireframe mode, now we can actually see the paths that were generated with that trace bitmap. And this is the information that InkStitch is going to use to convert things into embroidery. But we have just one single path at this moment, and we need more information than that. We can't work with just one single path. We have to work with all these things individually. So the first thing we're going to do is come up here to path and choose this break apart option. Now you'll see me toggle between the outline or wireframe mode to normal mode really easily, and this is one thing you definitely want to do. When you're learning Inkscape, when you're learning InkStitch, you definitely want to keep in mind some key keyboard shortcuts. And in my case, I'm using Alt-Q to toggle between these two views. You can come up to the View menu, you can choose Display Mode, and you can choose Normal. And then when you want to switch back, you can hit View, Display Mode, Outline. So clearly you can do that if you want, but certainly a keyboard shortcut toggling back and forth is much easier. So we do have a separate video on keyboard shortcuts, how to apply them, and so you can set up your workspace however you want to, or you can set it up the exact same way I've set mine up. But keyboard shortcuts are a real game changer, so definitely take the time to learn some keyboard shortcuts. Okay. I will post a link in the description below for our video on setting keyboard shortcuts here inside Inkscape. It's a really big deal. All right. So with that said, let's go ahead, and you can see here we've got a million paths. So this inside one right here we don't need, so we're going to go ahead and delete that. And then this one we don't need, we're going to delete that. So let's go back to normal mode. I remember my keyboard shortcut is Alt-Q. Now we have this big black circle which we need to get rid of. So we'll select our big circle here, no fill. So we're going to use our left mouse button on this red X and then shift click on any color that will add a stroke. So our inner circle, we cannot have a fill, but we do need a stroke. There we go. Okay. The width of our stroke right now does not really necessarily matter. So now what I would like to do is I'd like to create a series of layers. So we'll go ahead and click on this add layer button, and we're going to choose text. And we're going to click another layer, and we'll call it outer rings. And then we're going to create another layer, and we'll call it man logo. And I think that's good for now. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to move the respective things on their own layers. So we'll select our outer ring and then shift click on the inner ring here. And we are going to choose, notice it says move to layer. Okay, and then it pops up and we're going to move it to our outer ring layer and choose move. And you can see, boom, those are now in place. And then we're going to go ahead and select all of our text elements. So we are in our selection tool. If we hold down our Alt key and click and drag, you see that little red little rubber band thing there? Well, we're going to cycle through all of this stuff just like so, and we could go around as many times as we want. But basically anything that that red line touched is now selected. How fun is that? So again, we'll right click, move to layer, and we're going to move it to our text layer. Move. Okay, so now that's been moved to our text layer. And so now if I want to, I can come to my text layer and just turn off the visibility. We'll go to our outer rings layer, we're going to turn off that visibility. And so all of these elements, now everything that's left here, should then be moved to our man logo. So we'll move to layer, and we'll choose man logo and choose move. And so now everything is on that layer, okay? Now, so this layer 1 here, we'll just call it original image. Now we don't have to do it this way. This is just how I like to do it. I like to have everything on separate layers so I can toggle things on and off at will. All right, so let's just begin the process here. I'm probably going to go more in depth as I walk through this logo than I typically would. But if you're brand new and you really want to understand how things work, trust me. If this video winds up being an hour long, so be it. But I promise you, you will be in a way better position watching this video and spending an hour of your time than if you're going to just try and figure things out yourself. I promise you. So just bear with me. And I think you're going to learn some interesting things. So, decision time. How do we want our man to stitch out? Well, first of all, I'm going to switch over to millimeter mode, and I would suggest working in millimeters. Kind of the industry does, when we're talking about embroidery, kind of does work in millimeters, but as you work through your designs, I feel like millimeters will be a little bit easier to understand, especially when we're dealing with very tiny embroidery elements. All right. So first of all, what do we see about our man head here? First of all, you could see that he is about 7.5 millimeters in diameter, and 7.5 millimeters in the embroidery world. Well, that's not huge. It's pretty small. So we have to decide how we want this to stitch out. Do we want a fill stitch? Do we want satin stitch? Those are basically the two main considerations. So in this case, I want my head to stitch out in satin. So we know for sure if we're dealing with satin that we cannot have fill. If we have fill, then InkStitch is going to assume that we want fill stitches. So first of all, no fill. But we do need some type of stroke. So we'll shift click any color, doesn't matter. And then the width of the stroke for satin is not really that important for this particular example. So let's go back over here to our stroke style and let's give it 0.3. I don't know, something like that. Okay, we just don't want it so thick. 0.3 is fine. All right, now you can see that our circle is a little bit wonky. Okay, now we could just go ahead and recreate this circle if we wanted to using our ellipse tool. That's certainly, or we could just kind of come in here and double click on it and you'll see what we've got going on here. We've got quite a few nodes. Okay, so we're just going to double click up here, right up top, right down below, double click right, try to get right in the center of our circle, and then everything else, let's just dispose of. So if we hold down the Alt key, it's going to do the same thing as it did before. It will allow us to just create circles, and that, and then we'll create a node right here, right, in about what we think is middle, and then we will just get rid of that one. Let's get rid of both of these here. There we go. Delete. And notice what happened there. I'm glad this happened. It changed the top because I guess I accidentally deleted the top node, but we'll cycle through again and we'll delete those. And there we go. So you can see here with a little bit of node editing, we have now basically what appears to be almost a perfect circle, right? So would I normally do that for something so simple? No, I probably would have just used the ellipse tool. But I just wanted to introduce you just a tiny little bit into node editing because as we progress, node editing will be really important. Okay? So now I have to think about how I want this to stitch. Do I want my satin stitches to go horizontally, or do I want them to go vertically, or do I want them to go at an angle? Well, how do I want my satin stitches to be? Well, in this case, I want them to be completely horizontal. So this is how you get there. We'll double click on our path. We'll select that node, shift select this one. And this is your first keyboard shortcut you got to put to memory because we do this all the time. And that is break nodes. Okay, so Shift B is our keyboard shortcut. And it is right here as well. So when you're in your node tool, see it says break path at selected nodes. But this is something we do all the time. See there? It's broken. All right. So now we do have two pieces because we broke those two nodes. Now, just to illustrate the point, if we go break apart our path, you will see that we have this side and we have this side. And we have that because we broke it top and bottom. Okay. Now, when you're dealing with satin rails, they do need to be combined. So here's another keyboard shortcut when you're combining paths, combining rails, Control K. That will combine those two again. Now we're going to come up here to extensions and InkStitch, and we're going to come down to params. Now, params is where we set the parameters of our embroidery stitches. Now notice I have a keyboard shortcut set for Control-Alt-P because every time we go into params, which we do a lot, we don't want to have to go to extensions, InkStitch, params. We can just hit Control-Alt-P, okay? Control-Alt-S is simulator, and so on and so forth, okay? So all of my InkStitch shortcuts, I usually start with Control-Alt and then a letter. So in this case, Control-Alt-P. So here we are. We need to go into params, so we could just hit Control-Alt-P. Boom, we're in params. Much easier than going through the InkStitch menu. Now, by default, because we have a stroke and because it's going to assume that we want running stitches. So we have to uncheck running stitches, and then it'll automatically switch over and says, okay, this guy wants satin columns. Okay, there you go. There's our satin stitches. They are horizontal because that's what we selected, right? So you can see here the default for the zigzag spacing is 0.4, which works out pretty well. We don't have any underlay specified for this, and nor do I think we need it. When we're dealing with a a 7.5 millimeter satin column, I don't feel like we probably need underlay. Okay, but certainly you could add some zigzag underlay. We could add a contour underlay. And you'll see what it does. See how it created this circle, and then it created some zigzag, and then we did that. Now, you may want to do that. So let's take a look at this. Let's more in depth. So right now we added contour, and we added zigzag, and you can clearly see we are at 73 stitches. Well, how many stitches are added by adding that? So let's take away our contour, take away our zigzag, and let's look at just the satin stitches. And you can see we're at 50. Okay, so you see that there, we're at 50. All right, so again, this is just something that you're going to have to kind of experiment with and stitch out various things to get a feel for what these params are actually going to do for you. So we're talking about 23 stitches, which is not significant. But if we did have underlay, you might feel like, number one, the purpose of underlay is to stabilize the fabric a bit more. So you may feel like if you feel like it's puckering, the fabric is puckering, you may want to add underlay. Or if you want to have a more fuller coverage and maybe have it feel like it's a little bit puffier, I guess you could say, you may want to add some underlay. It would give the stitches a little bit of thickness there for our head. So, you could add underlay, not add underlay. I guess I'm going to go ahead and do it. I'll do contour underlay and zigzag underlay. I'm just going to accept the defaults. We're good to go. We're moving on. Okay? So that takes care of the head. So now we're going to kind of move on to the next object here, which is the bow tie. All right. Now, certainly we could set this up to be a satin stitch if we wanted all this to just stitch out in satin stitch. If we select our bow tie, you could see that it's only 2 millimeters tall. So that's very tiny. And then you could see that it is about, 4.5 millimeters wide. So it's pretty tiny. But I think it would probably look best if we were to do it in satin stitches. So, but do it in satin stitches in a certain way. So what we're going to do is grab our pen tool. So we just hit the B key on our keyboard. We're going to turn off snapping for this. And we're just going to create a line just like that. Okay. Now, in this particular case, I am not going to use the shape that already exists. I feel like this is going to be better if we recreate it. So we're going to duplicate that path we just made, Control D. Okay, and then if we hit V on our keyboard, that will automatically flip it vertically. H is horizontally. Okay, and we're just going to bring that down. Now we have to combine these two, so shift click, so both of them are selected. And then remember what that keyboard shortcut was? That's your first test. If you guessed Control K, you're right. That combines those two together. And Shift Control K, by the way, will bust them apart. Okay? Control K. But we got to have both selected. Control K. All right. So now that we have those selected, we can come back into params. Control Alt P. We're not going to go through extensions and InkStitch and params anymore. We have our keyboard shortcut, right? So might as well use it. All right. So now we go back into params. Turn off our running stitch, and then it's automatically going to give us a satin column. You can see that there. Now, because this is such a tiny little piece, I am going to change my zigzag spacing to 0.25. That's a personal choice. But you can see we have a lot more stitches now. And I like that. Okay? So now that we have this side selected or created, we're just going to Control D. That will duplicate it, right? H will flip it over. And then we could just slide it over here. And now we have that piece. And now I'm going to grab my ellipse tool. So E on my keyboard. If I hold down my control key, I can create a perfect little circle. Look at there. Okay, so now I have my circle. And then we're going to do just what we did up here. Path, object to path, because we're going to switch our ellipse to a path. Double click, and we have that node, right? Shift click this one. Break nodes, your next test. What was the keyboard shortcut? Shift B, correct. Okay, so now that we've done that, we can come up here to InkStitch and params, use that keyboard shortcut. I'm telling you, it's going to be a lot quicker. No running stitch, it will automatically give us a satin column. There you go. And I will go ahead and switch my satin column to 0.25. Just give it a few more stitches. I like that better, okay? I just like that better. All right, now, feel like we're making progress here, and we are, but we've created a bit of a problem for us that we don't even know we created. So, first of all, there's one thing I want to introduce to you that is going to be quite useful to you. So, we're going to select our items, and we're going to automatically restack them in the order that we want them to stitch out. So let's go over to our layers palette here, and let's look at this. So we are in man logo here. If I select the head, he's first, and then this guy here is way up here, and this guy here is right above him, and then this guy here is right above him. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to select this piece, hold our shift key down and select the left bow, right bow, center bow. Okay? And we're going to come up here to extensions, and we're going to come here to InkStitch, and we're going to come here to the edit menu. Now you can see right here where it says restack objects in the order of selection. We do not have a keyboard shortcut set for this yet, but we certainly can, and then we don't have to go through it. Look at all those menus we had to go through. So that's definitely something that we use a lot. So we want a keyboard shortcut for that. So we might do Control-Alt-R for restack, okay? But at any rate, here we go. Restack. Okay, and now you can see that they're all been restacked. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, we don't need this anymore, so we'll go ahead and delete that. But now you can see, so we might even rename our elements here. So we'll call that head. We'll call this left bow. I like doing this. You don't necessarily have to do this. Right bow. And something that really bugs me is sometimes we rename stuff and look, it didn't accept it. And it's inexplicable because I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. But I don't know. Sometimes it just doesn't accept my layer names. It really bugs me. So there you go. All right. So now all of those objects have been renamed. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to go into Simulator. So again, we would go into InkStitch Extensions, InkStitch, Visualize, and there's Simulator, but I do have a keyboard shortcut for that. So if anytime I want to go into Simulator, I just hit Control-Alt-S, and that will take me right into Simulator. And I want to watch how this stitches out. So let's just pause this real quick and back up and show you. So there's our head being stitched. Excellent. And then it's going to stitch our bow, and then it's going to stitch this bow, and then it's going to stitch the center. So all that's pretty cool stuff, but I didn't show you something. Right? We have an enemy when it comes to embroidery, and this little guy is our enemy, the frog. The frog is our enemy. And you can see here, just in this tiny little piece, we have 3 of our frogs, and frogs will multiply like rabbits. And so we want to eliminate all frogs in a design. It's very, very important that we focus on eliminating all frogs if we can. Okay? So we'll explain that kind of as we go through. But yeah, frogs and thread trims are not good for embroidery productivity. So anytime, in any possible way, if we can eliminate a frog, we need to eliminate him. So I thought I would introduce this concept right now because we just have some very simple shapes and we could see what's happening. So if you want to advance in simulation mode, if you want to advance or go back stitches, it's really quite useful. The plus and minus key on your keyboard allows us to go forward and back. So if we really want to understand how something's stitching, stitch by stitch by stitch, we could do that just with the plus and minus key on our keyboard. So there is our first frog, right? So we need to eliminate that if we can, okay? And then we would fast forward. Now this is our next jump. See that? It's going to finish up top here, and then it's going to jump all the way over and start at the next object. And then when that's done, it's going to jump all the way over to the center. Now, that first frog, that first jump, we cannot change, okay? But the other 2 frogs, we absolutely can change. All right, so we will go ahead and do that so you have a better understanding of how to fix things. So let's go ahead and close that out and talk about that. So first of all, when our head is stitching from the top, it's going to finish right here at the bottom, and then it's going to jump to the left bow. But the left bow, we want it to stitch from the outside in. So let's see how it's stitching right now. So we will go into params, Control-Alt-P, and we could see that it's stitching from the inside out. So we're going to choose Swap Rails, and now it's going to stitch from the inside out. That does happen sometimes, but no need to panic. So when that does happen, when you click on Swap Rails and it doesn't stitch in the reverse direction, then we'll turn off Swap Rails and we'll choose Reverse Both Rails up here. And then you can see it does in fact stitch from the outside in. Perfect. So we'll choose Apply and Quit. Now, on the right side, we need it to stitch from the outside in. So we'll go back into params. And I believe right now it's stitching from the outside, or from the inside out. We need it stitched from the outside in. So first we'll choose Swap Rails. Nothing happens. So then we'll go Reverse Rails. And now it's stitching from the outside in. Perfect. So we'll choose Apply and Quit. Now, where this guy stitches, we want it to stitch from the top bottom. So let's just double check that that in fact is what's happening here. And it is not. It is stitching from the bottom up. We need it from the top down. So let's go ahead and choose that. Swap Rails. And you can see by swapping the rails, now it's stitching from the top down. So it did work in that particular instance. So we'll choose Apply and Quit. Beautiful. So now we have everything stitching in the right order that we need it to stitch, but we have not dealt with our jump stitches just yet. And like I said, really, I would go and create my entire design and deal with what I'm about to show you at the very end. But for this example, let's just walk through it real quick. So I'm going to select all of my elements, and I'm going to come up here to Extensions, InkStitch, and we have a function down here, Tool Stroke. Now I do have a keyboard shortcut already set for this, which is Control-Alt and then J for jump. But we're going to go ahead and choose it right here where it says Jump Stitch to Stroke. We'll go ahead and select that and choose Apply. And now you can see we have some jump stitches. So this one right here, for example, I am going to change the width to 0.02. Or let's make it a little bit bigger, 0.1 maybe. So it's there, but it's not quite so bold where it looks kind of odd. So we'll go back up here to, what did we do, 0.1? Yes, 0.1. All right, so now what we have to do is we just have to reroute these so they make a little bit more sense. So we're going to reroute this one to here and this one to here. Now remember, we got satin stitches that are going to come and cover this up. Maybe we'll do that, something like that. And then this one's finishing up over here, but it's going to start over there. Okay. So there we go. And apparently there was no jump stitch right here. When we finished this object and started this one, there was no jump stitch. So now let's just see. Let's go back into Simulator here and see if that did in fact fix everything for us. So we don't see any frogs just yet. So we'll turn on our frogs. You can see he's highlighted, but notice now there are no frogs. And basically what it's saying is the reason that this isn't considered a jump is because it's so close together that it doesn't register as a jump stitch, a true jump stitch. There is one more thing I want to just illustrate that is important for us. It's this guy right here, and that's needle points. Sometimes it is useful to look at needle points. So we'll go ahead and look at it and kind of introduce that. So all these red circles are needle points, okay? And the main thing I wanted to show you here was when it does jump from this object to this object, notice that there's no needle point in between. So if you want to trim this little piece of thread, it'll be super easy to trim when it's completed. So because there's no extra needle points in between. Now I do want to back this up here. Let's get rid of our needle points here. Just look at our stitches. I want to see what happened here when we finished up. So you see why, you can see why, first of all, why we decided when we finished our head, why we decided to stitch, we did a running stitch to the outside of our bow, right? And then so it finished on the inside, and then a running stitch over to, let's turn on our needle points here. So you can see that is a jump from this bow to this bow because there's not much distance there. But then it's going to do a running stitch to the outside of our bow. And the reason we had it stitched from the outside in is so when it finished, see how it made that tiny little jump to the top of the center of our bow. And that's why we had things stitched in that order. So that's one part of doing embroidery that you really have to train your brain, like exactly how this is all going to path out to make it all look right. Okay, so I will say this: other software programs kind of do that process a lot better for you and kind of automate that process. Whereas here in InkStitch, unfortunately, it doesn't do a great job of automating. So we have to kind of use our noggin just a little bit. All right, so with all that said, now we can kind of continue to move on. Now, these little guys here, you can see they're quite wonky, and we already have one created. So we're just going to duplicate it and drag this one down. See there? And then we can just resize this one. And then same thing. When we're, I don't know, maybe how big is that? That's only that's basically 2 millimeters. That's probably as small as we want to go. But we're going to duplicate it first. Okay. And then we will just move that one down. Now, remember, this already has satin stitches applied. This one already had satin stitches applied. The head already had satin stitches applied. So we really don't need to go into params, but we will, just to show you that, in fact, those really are already satin stitches. See? Already satin stitches, so we don't have to do any more to those. Okay, so that's taken care of. All right, let the fun begin. Now this is the part of the design where we get to use kind of a creative license of how we want to go about creating this design. So I'm going to show you the way I would do it, and then you might do it entirely differently. But you'll learn some really interesting things along the way, I think. So what we have to do is we have to put our designer cap on, pretend that we're going to be a tailor, and we're going to have to tailor his suit a little bit here. So we have to decide in our minds how we're actually going to stitch this out. Do we want, because, you know, right now, let me just show you real quick. Right now, we have a single piece, okay? And we might want to stitch that out as a single piece. We may not want to. But in my case, I want to make it complicated and not stitch it out as a single piece. So I'm going to kind of walk through how we're going to do this. But again, this is entirely up to you, obviously. So what we're going to do is go into our pen tool, and we are going to turn on snapping for this. And I'm just going to go ahead and click right here, and then I'm going to click a line right about there. And right click, and you can see we have a line. And then I'm going to come over here and do the same kind of thing. Right click there, and then right click, we have a line. Right here in the center of his suit, I'm going to click a line and right click. I'm going to just come in here. There we go. That's a little bit more straight. Right click. Oh, what's happening here? Let me go into wireframe mode. You know what? We don't even have to be. We can overlap just like this. There we go. So we don't have to click dead on that line if we don't want to. You can zoom in here. Let's click right there. There's a line. Where else do we want? A little snip. Little snip here, right here. We're going to do a little snip right here. Let's come down here. Come up here. Zoom in a little bit. And let's just do it like that. Okay? So there we go. So now I've created these other lines. Let me just look real quick, make sure that we don't want or need anything else. I think we're good. All right, so you can see we've created these lines. Now, when you're doing this process, I'll explain more here in a second, but as a general rule, when we're slicing up his suit here, we don't want these slice lines to be very thick. All right. So let me just select one and look. Okay, so it's 0.1 millimeter. That's fine. But we don't want these to be very thick. Now, I don't know if this is true or not true entirely, but there's one thing that really bugs me about InkScape. It works kind of weird. I don't know if there's a way to turn it off in preferences somewhere. If there is, I haven't discovered it. But what we're about to do is we're going to be using a new tool. It's a paint bucket tool, and we're going to create new shapes with our paint bucket tool. But these strokes, they're 0.1 millimeter. These strokes have a width. The path, you can see here, the path is just a path. And in other vector-based programs, the stroke does not count as width of our path until we convert it into a path. So in other words, just watch this right here. So we have a path, right? The path has a 0.1 millimeter stroke. But if we come up here to path, right, and we choose stroke to path, look at there. Now you see it has a width to it, doesn't it? But previously it didn't have a width, okay? And that's how, like I said, other programs, that's kind of how they work. But in this program, when we go to use our paint bucket tool, it's going to notice that that path has a 0.1 millimeter stroke applied, and it's going to use that as information. And I wish it didn't, but it does. And it's not a big deal, but it's just one little quirk here inside InkScape, and you'll understand as we go through now what I'm talking about. So first of all, paint bucket tool. The U key on our keyboard is our paint bucket tool. So if I switch to U, you see we get a little paint bucket. See that little paint bucket? But it's right here, okay? So there it is. There's your paint bucket tool. But it's something we use quite a bit, especially for this particular thing that we're about to do here. So all we're going to do is click inside all these different areas. So when I click on that area, you see how I get an outline? And I click here, 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 and I click here. And so now you can see everywhere I clicked, we have that area outlined, okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and delete the suit entirely. Goodbye. So there we go. And see what I was talking about here? If we go into outline mode, we'll see this better. But see how it has that thickness, that tiny little gap there? I wish it didn't do that. I really, really wish it wouldn't do that. But like I said, it's not a deal breaker necessarily. It's just kind of a weird little caveat. So these lines that these are our slice and dice lines, so we don't need those anymore. So let's go ahead and get rid of those. We do want to make sure we are getting rid of these slice and dice here. Normally I would just, make a selection, come up here, make a selection, because we know about where they are. So, but you see we have that tiny little gap between each one of those sections now. Again, not that big a deal, but I'll show you how we're going to fix it here in just a second. But this little piece right here, we don't want. We don't want this little piece here. So we're going to go ahead and grab our pen tool, and we are still in snapping mode here. Come back around. See how it's highlighted? So we created that little chunk, and then we're going to select that little chunk that we just created and the path that we want to trim, and we're going to come up here to path and difference, right here, path and difference. Now, if you really want to learn a lot about Inkscape, watch every video you can on Inkscape Boolean operations. Union, difference, intersection, exclusion, division, cut path, and combine. Those are Boolean operations. And if we really understand how those work and where you would use one over another and things like that, that is going to really help you in your design process. So definitely study Boolean operations for Inkscape. We're going to choose difference here, and you're going to see, goodbye, that little chunk is now gone forever. All right, so excellent. We're moving right along here. So now you can see what we got here. So firstly, the first thing that we want to consider is what pieces how we want certain pieces to look. So for me, for the suit coat here, I want that to be a fill. Well, in order for that to be a fill, it has to have a fill color. So let's make it black. Let's get rid of our stroke, otherwise it will think we want stitches on the outside of our suit, which we may. Maybe we do. We might. Let's go ahead and now let's get rid of it. Shift click, that gets rid of our stroke. But we may want to come back in, and that might be another fun little design element to add to make it look a bit more interesting. So, but at any rate, we want that to be a fill. On this side, same thing. Left click and shift click to get rid of the stroke. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so what we're going to do here for the left side of our coat, let's go into InkStitch Params. And what we want to do is, you can see here we do have a fill, and it's automatically going to put an underlay in for us. But for our stitch angle, we want to do a -30. Let's do -30. And so you see how that stitch angle is? It's going this way. Okay, let's go ahead and choose apply and quit, and we'll show you why that's important here in a second. So the stitch angle is going like this into the center of his chest. So on this one, we're going to do the opposite. InkStitch Params. We're going to do 30 degrees, not -30. So for our angle, we're going to do 30. And now you'll see that the stitches are going to go this way into the center of his chest. And yes, that's what we want. So you'll see this when we actually go to stitch it out, how cool that will kind of look. All right, so now we got to talk about this little piece. How do we want that to stitch out? Well, that little piece I want to stitch out as satin stitches. So how do I want it to stitch out in satin stitches? Well, I know one thing for sure. I want the satin stitches to stitch vertically. Okay, so how do we go about making sure that these satin stitches stitch vertically? Well, if you remember before on our circle, we had to break this vertically. Oh, actually, they were going horizontally. I'm sorry, my bad. So, so in this case, we want our satin stitches to be horizontal. Okay, so we need to break it apart horizontally. Okay, so what we have to do is we got to double click down here to create a node, and then we're going to shift click on this node. And remember, our keyboard shortcut for breaking nodes is Shift B. And then we're going to click on this one, and we're going to break that node, Shift B. Now, we cannot have a fill, remember, because satins can't have fill, but they do need some type of stroke. Okay, so now we just went and added our stroke. Now that's way too big, so let's back it off, 0.1. Okay, now we broke it here and we broke it here, but we got to get rid of this segment here. So we could just select that and get rid of it. And remember what our delete segment option was. So our delete segment, remember we hold down the, so we click on the segment we want to delete. So those are the two nodes that are highlighted when we do that. And then Alt Delete will delete that segment. Okay. So now what's left here, remember what's left here is we essentially have a rail that's going to come up down here and down here. So from here to here and from here to here. So this here we don't need, and we don't need this one either. And we can, this one here, we don't have any transformation handles, but I do want to maybe make an adjustment there. So we could turn on our adjustment handles here. So there we go. And I just want to see if I can just make this a little bit more rounded, I guess you could say. Okay, I like that. So let's see what happens when we convert that InkStitch params into satin now. So we don't want running stitches. Okay, and we do want to increase our zigzag spacing. Give us a couple more satin stitches. Yeah, I think I like that better. Okay. Now you see these little short stitches that we do that. There is right here this short stitch inset. If we play with this a little bit, you'll see that change a little bit. Okay, so if we, let's say we did 1%. Okay, so you'll see those shorts. Like I said, I don't know if that's a really big deal, but if you want to control how those do kind of inset a little bit, that's the param that allows you to do that. So there is his little hand in satin stitches. His vest now is in fill stitches. And then now what are we going to do for the arm? Well, for the arm, I think I'm going to try satin stitches. So what are we going to do here? So first of all, we're not going to have a dashed line for the arm. We're going to have a solid line. And what I want to do here is I want to break that node right there. And I want to get rid of this one. So there we go. We got rid of that one. And then, so this, I want satin stitches, satin stitches, satin stitches, satin stitches, all the way down to, let's go here. So Shift B, okay? So you see there, we have broke that apart. Now, one thing that's really, really important when we're dealing with satin stitches is the nodes, okay? I do not like creating rungs with satin stitches, so I'm not really going to talk about it. Pretend that you're not even able to do it. What we need to do is we need to control our satin stitch angles, and we do that with nodes. So that is going to be the very beginning, and this is going to be at the very end. So we do not necessarily need, we don't necessarily need this node. So I'm going to hit Control Alt and get rid of that one, and get rid of this one. Okay, so it's going to start and stop here, but I'm going to try and get rid of this one. You can see it changed a tiny little bit, not a lot, but it did change a tiny little bit. But we could control that point just with our control handles if we wanted a little bit more point without having a node. Okay, so now you see here we have this. This is going to become our first stitch angle specification. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that. And this has a node here. So I'm just going to add a mate to it across from it. I'm going to add a mate across from that one. Now this one here, so that looks good. This one here, I can add a mate directly across. So imagine drawing a straight line. Okay. Now these nodes here, I don't think we really need those. Maybe we do. Okay, so if we absolutely got to have one, let's go ahead and click on that one. If we absolutely, it needs a mate. That's the big takeaway here. So that's going to keep that stitch angle. Now you see we have a node there, which we do need. But where's its mate? Its mate's up here a little ways. So we want it directly across. Okay, in this particular case, we want it directly across. So we'll zoom in tight here a little bit. and then we'll get rid of this one. We don't need that one. Okay, so that's really all we need for stitch angles. Okay, so we have the start and stop here. Then you see that's got a mate, this has a mate, this has a mate, this has a mate, this one, and this one. But you can see here, this is kind of straight across, but then this one's leaning a little bit this way. So let's create a new one there, just so it's a little bit more straight across. All right, so now let's just see what happens if we convert that to satin, and you'll get a better picture of what that's going to look like. So we're not going to have running stitches. And there you can see it's going to look great, right? So that part's good. Let's go ahead and choose apply and quit. Now there is one other thing that I do want to just take a look at here, and that is I want to see how wide this satin is going to become. So we're going to go to our measure tool, and we're going to click and see exactly how wide this is. So we can see that we are only at 4 millimeters. Excellent. So no issues there, right? But let's go back into params here, because I do want to show you something real quick. So first of all, you can see that it does stitch out very nicely as far as our satin stitch goes. We've looked at our needle points here, and you can see we only have needle points on the very outside, so we don't have any interior needle points. But there is an option here for the length of our stitches here. So I want to, right here, you see where it says maximum stitch length? So if we had a very wide satin column, say 14 millimeters or something like that, and we didn't want a that big of a jump, we could add in the maximum stitch length. So if I add in, say, 2 millimeters, watch what happens. See how we get all those needle points in the middle of our satin, okay? So that is a very useful control right there that I just wanted you to be aware of when you're dealing with wide satins. But in this case, 4 millimeters is not what you consider wide, so we're good to go there. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take a look at this side. So again, we want a solid line. We are going to come in here, double click, and yes, we're going to hit Shift B because we're going to break that right there. Now we don't necessarily need this node, so we'll get rid of that. I do like to turn off my Bezier handles when I'm doing node editing because they can sometimes get in the way. Okay, so that has a pair, like this one we don't need, this one we don't need, this one we don't need. So all I'm doing is hitting Control Alt and then clicking on the node that we don't need. Don't want to have any nodes that we don't actually need. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get rid of that one. That one's okay. So that's going to pair up with this. Now this guy here, we'll go ahead and get rid of him. And we added a node there. So this node is going to pair up with that one. This one's going to pair up with that one. Then we'll do one straight across here. Then this one we don't need. So we'll get rid of that. And then we have to click on that. And then remember, we have to hit Alt-Delete to get rid of that segment because we don't need that. Okay? So now we'll go back into params, Control-Alt-P, and see if we did a good job defining our nodes, how our satin column is going to be. Going around that corner is going to be a little tricky, but looky there. It looks great. I'm very pleased with that. So done and dusted. That one is good to go. So now we got to take care of our little hand on this side. So again, no dashed line, step there. So we have to create 2 rails. We got to think about how we want our satin stitches to be. So I think we want them to go this direction, like this, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So that's kind of what we did here. These are going horizontal, so yes, I think we want those to go the same way. So yes, so how are we going to do that? Well, let's double click on our path, Shift B right at the tip. We're going to start and end satin there. And then what I think I'm going to do is come down here and same thing. We're going to Shift B that node. So that's going to break right there. And then we're going to go ahead and get rid of the nodes that we don't need. So we don't need that one. We don't need that one. That one. We can leave that one. I don't think we need it though. Let's go ahead and just get rid of it. Get rid of it. There we go. That's the nodes that we need. So let's just see once what that's going to look like if we convert that to satin. So that's what that's going to look like. I think I'm going to increase our density. And for now, we're going to accept that. For now. I don't know. We may want to change that a little bit later on. I don't really know. All right. So now for the main trousers here, we do want no stroke whatsoever. We do want to fill because we are just going to do that as a fill. So we'll open up our parameters here. Now our jacket, do you remember our jacket? We did a stitch angle of 30. So for our trousers, we may want to do a totally different stitch angle, which I'm just going to go ahead and select 45. But there are also some other types of things that we might want to do with our trousers, such as some type of pattern fill to give it a little bit more texture. You know, there's different things that we can do. But for right now, we'll just kind of do the quick and dirty basic fill, but at a slightly different angle than our suit coat here. And then for the tail, we are going to do that in satin as well. So we're going to zoom in here, double click right there, Shift B. We're going to break it there, and then we're going to come all the way to the top here. We're going to break it there, and then we're going to think about stitch angles here. So let's see. First of all, we don't need that or that or that. This is okay. So we do need that one, so we'll do a match across from that, and then I don't think we need that or that. And we're going to leave this one. We'll go ahead and put one directly across, but we don't need that one. Okay, so there we go. So now we can go ahead and give that some satin stitches. Take a look at what that looks like. Looks like we expected it. Now I think I am going to go ahead and just dump some more stitches in there. We're not talking about massive amount more, but I'll just make that just a little bit more full. Now I don't really like, see how those short stitch insets, I don't really like that. Like I said, it's probably not that big a deal, but I'll just back that off a little bit. There are still some short stitches in there just slightly, but we'll leave it at that. Okay, so I think that looks good. So what's next? Well, let's see here. What is next here? The next is the towel. Now I'm gonna make a judgment call here. Originally, this was just a thin outline. Let's go into outline mode here. Let's get a measurement of how wide this is first of all. That is only 1.40 millimeters. So that is pretty tiny. Okay, in my opinion, that's pretty tiny. So I think what we're going to do is we're not going to, we certainly could, but we're just going to do this towel as a fill. Okay, so we're not going to do it as a little satin stitch outline. So we are differentiating from the original logo just a little bit, but that's just what I've decided to do. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to set that stitch angle to be 30 degrees, and we'll leave it at that. Go ahead and call it good there. All right. So that is it in a nutshell. Now, I think I will go ahead and select all of these, and we're just going to change the color of all this to be black. That's all we're doing right here. So it's all the same color. And there we go. So now this little guy is ready to go here. So let's go ahead and select that and come up to extensions, and we'll choose InkStitch. And let's go ahead and, I don't know, do we want to do a stitch plan preview? Let's do it. Let's just go ahead and do a stitch plan preview. Now, the one thing that we haven't addressed is any jump stitches or anything like that. We haven't talked about, how this, what order all this is going to stitch in or anything like that. So there is a little bit of work to do there. But I just wanted to show you kind of what we got going on here. And looks pretty good, right? So you can see how by adding the details, how this just looks to me a little bit better when we're doing satin on the arms. We're doing that fill stitch that's meeting in the middle here. You can see here we got the fill stitch of our trousers, but then our tail of our suit coat we did in satin. We did the little satin on our hands. And like I said, we haven't addressed any of our jump stitch situations or anything, but you can see how good the basic design looks. Okay, so I think we're going to end this part one here. We're going to end it right here, and then we will talk about routing the man logo, getting it all routed right, and then of course our text and the little outline circles that we have to add. But hopefully this will get you excited to get in here and experiment and try some things. If you didn't want these gaps, these little gaps, of course, all we would do is just slide those pieces over a little bit. So you can see here, we just slide those pieces over, like this little hand here. We could slide it all over. But I think because it's such a minimal distance anyhow, that will all kind of shrink up when we do the embroidery, so you won't actually see an actual gap when you do the embroidery anyhow, because it's just such a minuscule spacing there. Okay, so that's it for this one. Thanks for watching.